Where do I file my lawsuit? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm an attorney with offices in Minnesota and New York City. And today we're going to talk about one of those primary questions you need to figure out if you're in a situation where you need to file a lawsuit, and that is simply, which court do you file in? There's going to be two different ways you need to look at this. The first is, on a geographical level, where do you need to file? Is it in a particular areas, in a particular state, a particular court? And then the second is, when we know geographically where we file, then we need to figure out what type of court. And we're going to talk about there's two main dividers between types of court, and that's the federal court and the state court. And when you're in state court, there can be a variety of different subcourts within the state court system that you need to look at and figure out which one is the best for you to file your lawsuit in. So the first thing we have to figure out is, geographically, where should your lawsuit be filed? The first place to look, especially in a breach of contract case, is, are there any provisions in your contract or your documents that require that your case be filed in a certain court? If so, that's the first court you'll be looking at. You want to make sure when you're putting together your contracts that you understand this. This is a provision I've talked about before in these videos, that you need to understand the venue and the jurisdiction provision so you know where a lawsuit would have to be filed. If you're located in Minnesota and the other party is located in Texas, you don't want a contract that says you have to bring any lawsuits in California. That doesn't make any sense. However, you may want to make sure that your contract says that any lawsuits are brought in the state of Minnesota, so that you're not litigating your cases down in Texas. Second thing we need to look at is, where did the events occur? So if we don't have a contractual provision saying that you must file in this court or that court, then we can look at where the events occurred. Where did the purchases occur? Where were the shipments sent to? What states have a connection to the dispute? Another thing you can look at for geography is, where is the defendant located? So going back to our example of a Minnesota and a Texas, we have two parties to a contract. If the Minnesota party is the one filing the lawsuit, they may not like it, but it may make more sense to file in Texas court, because you'll be local to the defendant, and if you get a judgment, it will be easier to enter the judgment against the defendant. So for example, if you bring your lawsuit in Minnesota and you end up with a default judgment against the other party in Minnesota, you can't simply go after those assets in Minnesota if the Texas defendant doesn't have any. So from there, you have to take your Minnesota judgment, take it over to Texas, get it registered there, and then begin enforcement actions in Texas. So it's a whole second step. So part of what you want to do is, when you're looking at your lawsuit and where you want to file it, you want to check to see, does it make more sense that we file in Texas in the beginning, so that you can go right to the enforcement stage if you get a judgment. And then finally, when you're looking at geography, just look if there's other special rules. So some types of contracts just have special rules. If you're dealing with the government contracts probably say you have to bring your lawsuits in Washington, D.C. If it's a state government, you probably have to bring it in or near your state's capital. So there can be special rules depending upon the type of lawsuit you have as to where geographically you have to file your lawsuit. Now, once you've figured out the geography of it, the second big step is figuring out what type of court you're in. When we're looking at courts, they really break down into two main types. The first is the federal court. The second is going to be the state court. Now, if you think you're going to be in federal court, you need to understand this is what's called a court of limited jurisdiction. You can't just file any type of case in federal court. So for example, if you're in a housing dispute with your landlord and you rent an apartment, chances are you're not going to be able to file your case in federal court, unless there's a constitutional issue that's as part of the lease, or if there's some federal question, or if you have an out-of-state other party and the amount in controversy is above a certain amount, then you could look at federal court. However, generally, federal court is a case of limited jurisdiction. You need to make sure you've got the right type of case, so you don't just run to the federal court. So what's more likely is, you're looking at the state court, and you're deciding which state, first of all, to bring it in. And now that you're in the state, you have to figure out what type of court you're going to file your case in. So there can be a variety of different courts that will deal with these types of cases. You can have small claims courts, which deal with very small amounts in dispute. You can have landlord-tenant courts, which are just like they sound like. They're for disputes between a landlord and a tenant. You can have a probate court if there's a dispute over a will or somebody's estate. There's a family court, and that's going to normally deal with things like divorces, child custody, and child support. There can also just be a local town court. So if you're not near a big metropolis and you're in a small town, there may be a town court that just has court sessions once a month that deals with local speeding tickets and local parking and traffic tickets. And of course, there's probably like a general county court wherever you are, which is generally handles any types of cases that can be brought in your county. So when you're looking at all these different considerations, there's two ways you can try to do this. The first is you could try to sort all of this out yourself, which is doable but can take a lot of work and a lot of time. The smarter way to do it, and as an attorney you're going to guess what I'm going to tell you, is go meet with an attorney so they can go through all of these options with you and find out what's the best court for you. For example, if you have a local judge in a town court who's really hostile towards certain types of cases, it may not be a good idea for you to bring that lawsuit in that town court. You may want to look at the district court. Or maybe you have a landlord-tenant matter that has some probate issues in it, and maybe there was a divorce involved as well. Make sure you're working with a professional to get to the right courthouse so that your case isn't dismissed for being in the wrong courthouse. If your case is dismissed, you can then go back to square one and have lost 5, 6, 7 months of work on a case that gets dismissed for not being in the correct court. If you're ready to get started, if you have questions about which court you should be in, you can go to my website, andrewmayers.com, and there's a red button on the front page that says Legal Strategy Session. Click that button, you'll be taken to my personal calendar. We can set up a phone call to talk for like 15 or 20 minutes and go through where you are now, what are some of these considerations when you're filing a lawsuit, and help you determine which court should you file your lawsuit in.